Hey folks, James Abrenio coming to you from Abrenio Cho. We are a personal injury, medical malpractice, and criminal defense firm in Fairfax, Virginia. It is December 2031, 2025, New Year's Eve. And I figured today I want to do something a little bit different than what I usually do. I wanted to bring you and I'm sure you're seeing a lot of videos about top tips for 2026 and what to do for the new year and what you need to do and what you need to let go. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring you top tips for the new year from an injury attorney's perspective, and just walk you through a few things that I'm thinking about as I'm asking the question for myself, but also what would I be telling folks that would ask me from that perspective. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So before I start, first of all, a couple things that I wanted to address. First of all, anything in this video that I provide is not legal advice. It's only for informational purposes only. While most of my videos actually deal with legal technical stuff, this is really clearly for informational purposes only. But if you want specific legal advice, hire an attorney. For some of these tips, it's going to be about finances and insurance and things like that. Look, I understand not everybody will have the financial means. There'll also be tips about health. I understand that some folks are going to not have the physical ability, and everybody's in different situations. Some a lot more fortunate, some are a lot less fortunate. So I don't mean any of these tips to be judgmental. My view is do the best you can, just like anything in life, just try the best you can and take it for what it is. I also say, look, I'm just a lawyer. I don't have an ego with this. It's really just something I thought that would be interesting. So take these tips for what they are. Feel free to take them with a grain of salt and all that. So, and also if you find this useful, also always make sure to like, subscribe, and share. So with that being said, my number one tip, complete an insurance inventory. What do I mean by that? I want you to think about the insurance policies in your life and actually take stock of what's going on there. So first of all, health insurance, if you're paying attention to the news, Obamacare and the ACA, there's a huge debate about, there are going to be subsidies and all that. I understand that. But if you have access to care, I want to make sure that you get that access to care. If you're lucky enough to work for an employer, that you get it through your employment, that's awesome. If you have to buy it for yourself, just be aware, open enrollment, at least through the ACA and your local states marketplaces. My understanding, it's through January 15. Again, this is not legal advice, so do your own research, but just keep that in mind. There are also special enrollment periods for folks that are losing coverage not in normal time. So for instance, my wife was working for a school board. We are going to be losing COBRA coverage in the end of March. So our special enrollment is supposed to be 60 days before and after that. So again, just understand what your abilities are to get covered. Also understand your coverage itself. Looking at deductibles, what does a deductible mean? Is it catastrophic care versus do you need something more than that? HSAs and all that. Do your research and look into what's best for you. And again, I understand a lot of folks just aren't going to have the financial ability, but if you have the financial ability, I would absolutely recommend this would be the top thing to get. As soon as you can pay for housing, food, and that kind of stuff, my view would be getting health insurance because things can happen. And if you have health issues, of course, the importance, but even if you're perfectly healthy and young, things can happen. Life insurance and disability, especially if you're a parent, life insurance, if something happens to you, if you're a father like me and you die, you want to make sure that your family is covered. I'm talking about specifically term life insurance. Again, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but my view is you just want to make sure that there's a bunch of money that if you die, they can replace your income, particularly for your children. Disability insurance is something that not a whole lot of people think about. If you're lucky enough to have that offered through your employment, make sure that you elect to have disability insurance. Disability is in case you can no longer work or you work limited ability. It replaces your income, maybe not all the way, but it gives income in case you're physically disabled. If you don't have it through work, let's say you have your own company, make sure that you understand and look into disability insurance, because if you can't work, you need to be able to replace the income again if you're able to. Auto insurance, we do a lot of car accident cases. Make sure that you pull out your car insurance and look to see what your actual coverage is. Don't just rely on Geico's Gecko saying you save $30 in 30 minutes or whatever that garbage is. I want you to look at the actual policies. So folks that purchase insurance, make sure you purchase liability, both property and bodily. That means if you injure somebody or you damage their vehicle, you're covered there. I want you to make sure that you purchase underinsured or uninsured motorist coverage. What is that? That means that if you're injured by somebody or your car is damaged by somebody, your insurance, and they don't have insurance or they don't have enough insurance, you can go through your own auto insurance. For the underinsured motorist for your bodily injury, we recommend, if you can, if you're able, up to at least 1 million in coverage, especially if you're a high earner. But that protects you if you are significantly injured by somebody else. And here's the thing, it's not as expensive as you would think. I'm talking about a couple $100 a year for $1 million policy. I personally have $1 million. I also have an umbrella policy, both UIM and liability, in case I hurt somebody or I get hurt. Maximize that coverage in case something hurts. It happens in an auto accident. And especially if you're driving, but even if you're not, you just got to be aware of that. Things can happen. Continue with insurance inventory, homeowners insurance or renters insurance. If you own a house, if you rent a house, that will cover you if somebody, not only if your house is damaged, but if somebody's injured on your property. For you dog owners, a lot of times I will have folks call me about dog bite cases where a dog has injured somebody. A lot of times homeowners insurance will protect you if you are sued for a dog injury caused by your dog or other animals. So just be aware, homeowners insurance is super important, particularly if you are an animal owner. For you business owners, liability coverage, specialty coverage. So for instance, for me, I have malpractice insurance in case I commit malpractice because I'm a lawyer. Same thing I imagine with doctors they should be doing. But let's say, for instance, I also have liability coverage. So if my paralegal is driving to a courthouse and causes an accident and injures somebody, make sure you have that as well. I didn't put this on here, workers' comp insurance. If you have employees, you should have workers' comp insurance to protect you and protect your employees in case they get injured. We mentioned long-term disability. Make sure that you get that for yourself as well as your employees, and they have the ability to sign up for long-term disability. Also, cyber insurance and data protection insurance. Let's say, I keep sensitive information on my data, on my servers and things like that. If there's a data breach, that way, if somebody needs to make a claim, you have that coverage. Keep that in mind. I know this stuff sounds expensive for you business owners, but look, relative to the peace of mind that it provides, it is worth it. And yes, it's expensive. My view always is, if you can't afford these basics of your business, you need to be thinking about, should you be running a business versus working as an employee. And look, I get how arrogant that sounds, but if you are building a business where you have employees, you need to protect them. Okay. Next, this is specific. This is an injury attorney's advice. So what happens if you get involved in an accident? Take pictures. This is car accident, slip and falls, things like that. Take pictures of the scene. Take pictures of the cars involved. If you fell on something, some substance in a store, take pictures of the substance you fell on. Take pictures of your injuries, both at the scene, but also as you recover. And look, I understand if you're badly injured, you may not be able to do these kinds of things because you're physically not in a position to do it. So let a friend or a family member know immediately if they're there at the scene to do it. If they have to go back, let's say you fell in a store, or let's say you are a friend or a family member as a passenger and somebody gets injured in your car, or you're driving and a passenger gets injured, takes these photographs, take pictures of injuries. It'll help later on if things get into litigation. Get a dash cam. I can't tell folks this enough. for your car, have a dash cam. That way, if somebody causes a crash, but then they go and lie and say that you caused the crash, this protects you. It's on video. Now, some folks may be worried, well, what if I caused the accident, right? This is going to end up hurting your case and proving that you caused the accident. But my view is I trust myself, and I trust folks watching this all the way. If you made it this far, I trust your judgment more than just some random driver, driver on the road. And also, if you're watching this, you're probably an honest person. If you cause an accident, you're not going to sit there and lie about it. So you end up protecting yourself if with the dash cam. If a car accident happens, always call law enforcement. I've seen far too many situations where, there'll be an apparent fender bender. My client thinks they're not injured, only to find out later on they've got a concussion, things like that. And the other side said, look, don't call law enforcement. Maybe they're uninsured. Maybe they've got a warrant out for them, things like that. So they don't want to get law enforcement involved. And I hate to be non-sympathetic about that circumstance, but at the end of the day, if you're injured, get law enforcement involved. That way there's records of it. If it's a catastrophic injury, obviously definitely call law enforcement. Even if it's a less serious one, the worst case scenario, the law enforcement officer says, it's not big enough for us to make a report or whatever, but you want to have had the effort to call law enforcement, and they can help. If there's witnesses, they can gather information. They can ask people if they have their own dash cam that might have caught the accident. They can ask for witness information, those kinds of things. That's what you pay taxes for. So call law enforcement if you've been in an accident, particularly if it wasn't your fault. And also talk to a lawyer as soon as possible, especially if you have potential injury case, whether it's medical malpractice, whether it's slip and fall, dog bite case, car crash. Most of us injury attorneys will do free consults. I know it feels intimidating, but the very worst, the lawyer says, look, it's not a case that I could take, but most folks will give you at least a few tips to think about, even if you're going to be calling other lawyers, but also just to think about if you're going to pursue the claim yourself. So most lawyers would talk to you for free. It never hurts to talk to a lawyer to get advice about your injury case. This is whether or not you're involved in an accident or you just have a health issue. I always recommend to have a health advocate if at all possible, particularly if you're going through some complicated medical issue, surgery, long-term issues, chronic issues, things where you're seeing multiple doctors and you're going to be getting multiple advices and multiple opinions. Just somebody there. It can be a friend or a family member that can help interpret, help listen, help advocate for you, help keep track of things. Have them come to appointments, make sure they understand the medical issue, make sure they understand, what the doctor or the medical provider is telling you to do next. If you have a lack of clarity from that provider, that's what the health advocate there is for, is to help you understand that information. And then also they can help you follow up with the providers if you have a lack of clarity or you still have concerns about your health issue. I've had multiple cases where fortunately, my client has had a health advocate, and that's just a fancy term in situations for a friend or a family member. I've had medical malpractice cases where folks are still in the hospital getting the care, and the family member knows what's happening is not right, and they're calling the nurses, they're calling the doctor saying, hey, something needs to be done. Unfortunately, by the time they come to me, that means that medical malpractice has happened, especially if we've taken the case on. So their advocacy didn't go as far as we wanted, but then they're there to help advocate in the litigation when the doctor or the nurse says, look, I didn't know, or this is something that couldn't have been avoided. But you've got a friend or a family member that's saying, well, look, I called you 4 times. They were telling you there was pain. They were telling you they couldn't breathe. They were telling you that there was blood in their stool and you were doing nothing, things like that. So keep that in mind and don't overcomplicate it. And I don't, again, this is advice. I understand a lot of people don't have a friend or family member that can help, or maybe they can't come to every appointment. Let's say it's a family member that can't come to appointments, have them on the phone. You can always conference them in if at all possible, or at least have them come to the most important appointments, that kind of thing. If you have a claim, if you have an injury claim, whether it's an accident case, a car crash case, dog bite case, medical malpractice case, make your attorney's job easier. And I don't say this to make my job easier. When you make your attorney's job easier, that usually leads to better outcomes for you because you've taken a proactive step. and helped advocating for your case. So number one, follow up with the recommended care that you're getting from your providers. I can't tell you how many cases where, I'm litigating and then the insurance company, the defense attorney says, well, they were told to go back to the neurologist, but they never did, or they didn't follow up after the emergency room with the orthopedist. So they couldn't have really been injured from this crash. It must have been some pre-existing condition, or they must be lying about it, and implying to a judge or a jury that that you only maybe you went back to care 6 months later after you talked to an attorney or something like that. Those gaps in treatment are going to be used against you in litigation, but also just from a non-case standpoint, follow-up care maximizes your ability to recover. Ultimately, every case that I handle, every client that I deal with, I want a situation where they reach 100% recovery, and the way to maximize that chance. And I know a lot of people, especially catastrophic injury cases that I handle, they won't ever reach 100%, but it maximizes the chance to get up to 100%, or at least maximizes the chance of the maximum recovery level. So follow up with care. It maximizes chance of getting better. It also documents your injuries, and then it prevents insurers from using that argument against you later. Keep pain journals. So what I mean by that is keep track of in a journal or a document, the treatment you're going through, the pain you're having, the difficulty you're having, because a lot of times these injury cases take months, years to litigate, and you're going to forget a lot of this stuff. But if you kept that in a journal, that's there for you to recall later on. That's there for the attorney. Likely you have to expect, if the case gets litigated, that's going to have to turn over to the defense attorney and the insurance company. But frankly, I would rather that information be there, because that is not, that's you keeping in real time what you're going through. Also document your injuries through photographs, through video. I have folks that will call me and say, hey, right after this accident, I had a bunch of bruising. I had this nasty laceration. And I say, do you have photographs of it? And they didn't take those. And so I take the best I can later on. Maybe there's scarring, but especially going through those early stages where you have nasty wounds, nasty bruising, you want to keep that, because later on you may have to show that to an insurance adjuster, to a jury, and you want to keep that because picture is worth 1,000 words. Keep track of friends and family that can help corroborate your injuries. So what I'm talking about is, your health advocate, for instance, or your spouse or whoever, and I get this a lot in brain injury cases, for instance, where a lot of times my clients don't even realize they have a brain injury until their loved one says, hey, you're not thinking correctly. You seem to be forgetting a lot of things, or you have coworkers that say, hey, you keep messing up the math here. That's not usual. You want to make sure you keep track of those folks. Later on, if you have to litigate or if you have to make a demand, you want to have that list of people there that that if need be, they can testify in court for you. Stay off social media. What do I mean by that? Don't post the photographs of your injuries, the photographs of your accident, make posts about, your medical care and all these kinds of things, because the insurance companies will be looking for that stuff real time, meaning once they get your claim, even if you were just injured last month, they have investigators that are pulling social media profiles. Also, if you get into litigation, they will be requesting that in litigation. Now, look, if you're watching this video and you've already posted, don't delete that stuff. You have a duty to preserve any evidence about your case. And if you've deleted social media, they can use that against you. So I'm not saying delete stuff that's already been posted. In fact, you have to preserve that. But going forward, don't post about it, okay? Don't talk about how the accident happened. Don't talk about how your injuries are, those kinds of things. That's what your attorney is for. That's for what your fellow witnesses are for. But remember, the insurance companies are always looking at these things as proof that you're not really injured, or that it wasn't their insurer's fault. So if you list about how the accident happened and you don't articulate it well, they'll say, hey, look, the inconsistent statements later on when you testify, or things that you wouldn't even think about. Let's say you post about your injury, but then later on you have a trip to Florida or whatever. They will keep track of your social media. And if you say that you've suffered a brain injury, but you're going to a vacation, how badly could you be hurt? Now, I always tell folks, look, minimize trips and things like that to the extent you can. But if you're injured, I'm not saying you have to stop living your life so you can live your life. Just be aware you're always going to talk. You're likely going to have to talk about that, but don't broadcast it to the world and therefore the insurance companies, because they're going to definitely use that against you. Take care of yourself. Okay. The next couple pieces of advice, by the way, are not so technical. It's more kind of lifestyle. And again, I don't mean to be arrogant when I'm giving these tips, because I'm a young guy. I'm fortunate to not have any real serious physical issues, no serious cognitive issues. Financially, I'm doing okay, those kinds of things. So I don't mean to say any of this with arrogance. What I mean to say is do the best you can. Okay. These are just things that I observed going through the years, having handled hundreds, if not thousands of clients. It's been 17 years now. I haven't kept track how many clients I have, but had a lot. And so I've seen these things happen over years. I've also lived my own life, right? Like anybody else, now in my early 40s, I've had a parent pass. I've had family members go through health issues. I've went through my own health issues. I've had kids. So, while I still have a lot to learn, I've learned a decent amount too. And so these are just a few things to think about. And again, with lack of arrogance, lack of judgment, really just in your mind, think about, if I'm at X, can I do a little bit more, right? So the first thing, recognize that health is your most valuable asset, okay? You may be working a very demanding job, and you just have to eat takeout. You may be young and you're just taking your health for granted. But I can tell you, as I'm getting older, I'm starting to have a lot of pain. I have a physical job as well. I can see it starting to wear, and I'm only like 42. And so I understand that without the health side of things, I can't do what I want to do from a business side, from a career side, from a legal side, also from a parenting side. So you got to recognize that your health is your most important asset. It's not a luxury to go to the gym. It's not a luxury to take that walk. It's not a luxury to get the sleep you need. It's not a luxury to do the things you need to make sure you can keep going, because you need to be thinking about this as a marathon, not a race, not a sprint. Okay. Things can change in an instant. We do a lot of injury work. And so I see a lot of very, very healthy folks that all of a sudden they got into a car crash and their entire life has changed. So you have to recognize, and I don't mean to be negative about it, but you have to recognize that this can happen to you. And so you need to really take advantage of things while you can. And part of that is recognizing that, your body is your temple and you should treat it as such. Don't overcomplicate this. I'm not, telling you to do David Goggins or whatever, and, go on Instagram and follow the physical influencers. I'm talking about the basics. Get enough sleep to the extent you can. Again, I've got a 6-month-old at home. I know how hard that is. Exercise to the extent you can. I'm not saying you need to, do CrossFit. I'm talking about getting out and doing some walking the best you can. But what's good for you, and eat vegetables. I'm saying that kind of jokingly. Obviously, vegetables are important, but eat, healthy food to the extent you can. Some people are limited in finances, and I totally understand that. But beans are pretty cheap. Eggs are pretty cheap. Rice is pretty cheap. Getting vegetables can be on more expensive side, but you can get canned vegetables and frozen vegetables and things like that. I am not, while I'd love to be, I'm not the Whole Foods guy where I'm getting organic and all that. I grew up on very basic cans of tuna. I can't tell you how many cans of tuna I grew up on, and I still eat, bunch of protein, a bunch of vitamins, that kind of thing. So there are ways to eat relatively healthy. And again, I'm not trying to judge. So if you're in a difficult spot financially, I'm not judging. I'm saying to the best you can. Okay. If you got work 4 jobs and you can't get a sleep, I understand that, but just do the best you can. A little bit better than last year, that kind of thing. I always tell folks, staying out of the healthcare system is your safest bet, whether it be an accident, whether it be because of medical malpractice, whether it could be because of some chronic issue. To the extent that you have any control whatsoever, do your best to stay out of the healthcare system, because even in a perfect world, even giving doctors operating at 100% and providers at 100%, our health system is just limited. Our science is just limited. Not everything can be fixed. Things like diabetes and things like that, we have treatments, but to the extent you can avoid it, you do your best. Also, medical malpractice happens, just like law malpractice happens. Just like when you go to the grocery store and the checkout person messes up your bagging. We're all human beings, so mistakes happen. So the best you can avoid it, you can do it. Insurance companies will also use any pre-existing condition to say that it's not really something they have to cover. Now, when it comes to accident cases, let's say you tear a rotator cuff, they're going to claim prior, shoulder pain. If you have sleep apnea, they're going to say that you couldn't have suffered a brain injury. It's really sleep apnea. They're going to use anything they can, and pre-existing conditions is really a hotbed there. And now, getting back to health insurance, and this is the reason I'm a big advocate of Obamacare and the ACA. While it's not perfect, and if I was, king, I would change a lot of things about it. One of the biggest important things about what Obamacare did was require protections for pre-existing conditions. If you have diabetes and then you get onto a new plan, that plan has to cover the prior care. We need those protections. I don't know how you do it. This is not a political show. It's really just, we need to make sure we protect that. So you need to keep that in mind too. Live below your means, save what you can. Again, no arrogance with this. I'm not hey, you can't buy the Starbucks once a week, that kind of thing. I'm not the avocado toast guy. I'm just here saying, from a factual standpoint, these are a couple of advice that everybody can consider, even folks with limited means. Remember, life can change in the blink of an eye. If you're doing well, something can happen and you're no longer doing well. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, look, do the best you can. Don't chase shiny objects to impress people. What do I mean by that? The new cars, the new houses, I get it. I would not like a bigger house. I'd like a nicer car. But in the day, as I'm 42 now, I own a business. I have 2 kids. I have a wife, and all these pressures. Things like new cars, things like getting a bigger house, those should go lower on my priority. Look, if I end up a billionaire, then I'm sure I could do all that stuff. But there are realities to all this, and wasting money on things to try to impress people that aren't even really caring anyway. I mean, you probably agree with this. Most people are only interested in your life to the extent that, number one, they love you and they're happy for you, or there's envy there, or they're, the quote haters, that kind of thing. But most people aren't even paying attention. They may see your nice car and say, oh, that's cool, but they're moving on. So don't waste your time trying to buy shiny objects to impress people. Learn about money constantly and build wealth. What do I mean by that? Money is a very complicated situation, and you're always in a different stage in your life. For folks that are living paycheck to paycheck or that are in debt, figure out, again, do the best you can to learn about the ways to get out of debt. Once you're out of debt, and let's say you're living paycheck to paycheck, learn about how to build that emergency fund so if something happens. Once you get beyond that, learn about how to start building wealth, start paying for things, to start paying for your kids' college, to start building investments. How do you, once you start actually getting a little bit of money, how do you turn that money into more money? That kind of thing. It's a constant learning experience. And frankly, I find it interesting. I try to do my best to think about money in a way that is interesting. The way I do it is I think about the stories of money. How did it used to be used back in the day? I was just listening to a podcast this morning about how the Roman Empire created pensions in order to allow the emperor to have power, because if your soldiers get pensions, they're not going to rise up against you later on. I mean, these are all interesting things. Learning about the life of somebody that's been super successful that came from nothing, but also learning about how does the stock market work, and what is risk, how do IRAs work, what is risk, what is an HSA, what is compounding interest. This is stuff that I am far from being an expert in. Again, I'm 42 years old. I started off as a public defender in my legal career, just so you know. I came out of law school 2008, right after the Great Recession, no jobs. I had 6 figures in student loans, and I lived my life. My first decade as a lawyer is an artist lawyer, meaning I didn't have any money at all. For the first 5 years, my student loans were growing, meaning I was paying to work because those interests were growing more than my salary could keep up with. Now that I'm 42, things are more comfortable. I still have a lot of goals that I want to achieve, but my point is every stage in your life and every circumstance, don't think about winning the lottery. It's the slow, progressive steps. get on to YouTube, listen to podcasts, read as much as you can. And I always tell folks, it's not about being rich; it's about preparing for rainy days and opportunities. What I mean by that, if things go bad and you've got savings, you no longer, it's no longer catastrophic if you can pay for that serious thing that happens. And then also, if you're in a situation where you're doing well, and let's say, there's this opportunity, you're a stage where you're like, well, I have a bunch of money. I want to invest that into a rental property, into a particular stock. You can't do any of that unless you've built wealth. So always just be aware of your situation and moving forward. So again, no judgment there, just for what it's worth. Again, really, the other thing, recognize what you can change and what you can't change. Minimize negative people. What do I mean by that? You may have a loved one who they're constantly bringing you down. You may have a friend or family that are constantly bringing you down, constantly talking about the negative. I'm not saying shut those people out. Again, I'm not being judgmental, but if you're finding that people aren't helping you move forward, I'm not saying shut them down, keep them in your life, but recognize what that does to you and understand that you want to be around people that are going to inspire you, that are going to show you love, that are going to enjoy when you succeed, and you're going to enjoy when they succeed. And by being around more positive people, you're going to be a positive person too, for what it's worth. These are very politically charged times. I'm one that's gotten caught up in, all the things that are happening at the national level that are trickling down to the state level. But where I try to do my best, and I'm not great at this, is I try to be aware of the things that I can change and the things that I can't. So number one, as I vote, can't complain if I don't vote. Number two, I get involved. And so I'm a lawyer. I deal with civil law and I deal with criminal law. So I do my best to be involved at the state level and trying to have some type of involvement in helping move those things forward. But I'm not an elected official, so there's only so much that I can do. But I do what I can. I go to fundraising events. I try to educate folks, if you follow this channel, about laws that are changing. And I do what I can in my own way, and maybe that evolves over time. But I do the best I can. But I try my best not to let it consume me. While, again, if you know me, you probably are aware that sometimes that gets the best of me. But, again, and this part of me giving this list is telling myself these things. Again, make goal to build net worth. What do I mean by that? It's really going back to the financial side. Money is like air. You need enough of it. And once you get enough, then you can breathe. But really focus on that. And again, as a lifelong lesson and a lifelong project. And this is really to take the pressure off when bad things happen. And I think I talked about that a little bit more. But the other thing is from a financial side, in your career, if you have money, you can take the risks that you want to take. So if it's that new job that maybe pays a little less, maybe you want to go to public service, maybe you want to start a business, you have to have some foundational financial situation to not make that a life risking situation. And prioritize friends and family. Again, most of the above were just steps, small steps. I'm not expecting everything to be done in one day and things that I'm working on. But at the end of the day, it's the people in your lives that matter most, friends and family. I'll tell you, I lost my mom about almost 4 years ago, 2 days before my first daughter was born. And, we all have regrets in life. And part of my regret is, letting, things that didn't matter get in the way of those relationships. Towards the end, I'm very fortunate to spend a lot of time with my mom. But, in younger days, we would disagree about, careers and politics and things like that. And I regret that, allowing it to affect our relationship. And now she's gone. And now all I have is thinking about the positives and the regrets that I have. People are gone in an instant. When they're gone, I can just tell you they're not there anymore. They're just not there. And it's this stark thing that happened. I've had friends that have, passed away over the years that are close to me. That when they're not there anymore. So if you're not taking time to prioritize them, you don't want to be just in a situation where you're going to each other's funerals. You want to take advantage of life while it's there, for what it's worth. And so, a lot of friends and family are going through difficult stuff. Maybe you're in a better time right now. Use that energy that you've gained from your positives to help out friends and family in your life that need it most. So look, these are just a few tips from an injury lawyer, from a practice in Fairfax, Virginia, a dad, a husband. Take them for what they are, and I hope that they've been useful. Maybe you have tips that you'd recommend that I left out. Maybe you disagree with things. Feel free to comment below, and share the channel. Again, we're just trying to do our best to reach as many people, get some information out there for what it's worth. And I wish everybody a safe New Year's Eve. Make sure to don't drink and drive. And I wish you a happy new year. Be safe, everybody. Take